One thought of the rebirth of all worlds, one thought of the extinction of all worlds, the eternal cycle is only for her. A blurry young man stood in the void and whispered to himself, I have reached the pinnacle of my own path. He said I won, but in the end, I still lost. With a sigh, the entire vortex of the void roared like an endless sea of anger, and he was the master of this sea of anger. He, starting from the four spiritual roots, dreams, spread out from a bald mountain. Chapter 1. The Fallen Immortal Cultivation Family. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The border of Yen State is Yuezhou. In early February, the spring rain is continuous. In the early morning, while everyone was asleep, in a blue stone-tiled house in Luochen village, Huda town, a flickering candle flickered like a star in the darkness, exceptionally dazzling. The house is very simple, with only one wooden square table and two four-cornered wooden stools. On the wooden bed in that corner, there lay a middle-aged man with a waxy yellow face, and in front of the bed knelt a young man about 14 years old. Cough. Chen Shi, as a father, there's not much time left. Do you remember what I said to you before? The middle-aged man's face was devoid of blood, gasping for breath, and he stared at the young man in front of him in a deep voice, word by word. The young man was dressed in a pale washed blue linen robe, with a plain face, but his features were distinct, especially his towering nose, which exuded a touch of spirituality and made his eyes shine. Unfortunately, his skin was slightly black, giving off a rustic feeling. However, at this moment, there was a hint of tears in the corners of his eyes, but he kept trying to hold back and didn't dare to cry. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's question, he immediately straightened his slightly bent back and said in a hoarse voice, Dad, the child remembers your words. We will definitely live well and find a way to solve the exhaustion of our bloodline. Alas, don't blame my father for putting the heavy burden on you. The family's bloodline has been cut off when we reach you. Your uncles passed away before the age of 40, and your mother passed away a few years ago due to overwork and illness. Now, you are the only child left in the entire family. The middle-aged man couldn't help but burst into tears at the corners of his eyes, and his rough palms couldn't help but stroke the boy's hair. The child knows that our Chen family's cultivation of immortals gradually became thin after our ancestors disappeared, and later on, all members of our clan could not live to be 40 years old. The young man said, holding the palm of the middle-aged man's hand. The middle-aged man suppressed his cough and smiled, I believe you can do it, Shir, because you are the only child in my Chen family who has spiritual roots for hundreds of years. Since the disappearance of their ancestors, the once prosperous Chen family has gradually declined, and future generations no longer have spiritual roots, causing the family's foundation to shake. Eventually, they had to move from the bustling Xingjing to this remote Luochen village. The middle-aged man gently broke free from the boy's hand and sat up trembling. He lifted a corner of the bed sheet that had been pressed under him, gently tapped the exposed bed board with his fingers, and then broke open one of them, revealing a pitch-black wooden box inside. The young man named Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned when he saw this scene. After living in this tiled house for more than 10 years, he didn't know that there was still a hidden world under this wooden bed. The middle-aged man looked at the wooden box quietly, sighed, took it out, and gently placed it on his thigh. This is the only thing our family can leave for you. The middle-aged man forced a smile as he looked at the boy's wide eyes and opened the wooden box in front of him. There was only one thing wrapped in red fabric in the wooden box, and the middle-aged man took it out without saying a word and handed it to the boy. Open it up and take a look, the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The young man held the package with both hands and opened the fabric on his face. In front of him was a palm-sized golden token with the 3 black characters, Yueshi sect, engraved in the middle. This is the token of the Yueshi sect, one of the 4 major sects in our Yuezhou. Those who hold this order and have spiritual roots can unconditionally worship this sect. Perhaps because when our family first arrived in Yuezhou, we had made efforts for the Yueshi sect and sacrificed several members of our clan. Therefore, this token is specially given to our family, giving us an amnesty spot that can be entered directly without selection, the middle-aged man explained with a smile. The young man once again took a deep look at the token in his hand and then put it away close to him. When the token touched the skin on his chest, a hint of coolness flowed out, and the young man suddenly felt his mind clear, which surprised him deeply. The lights were still flickering inside the house. The long conversation seemed to boost the middle-aged man's lethargic spirit, and he no longer showed any signs of illness, and his voice became much louder. He sighed deeply and said, "Sheer, if it weren't for bloodline issues, as a father, I don't want you to embark on the path of cultivating immortals. You know, several branches of the clan were slaughtered because they offended enemies who were also cultivators. The entire branch no longer exists." The young man nodded and whispered, "Is that the reason why the third uncle's pulse disappeared back then?" The middle-aged man sighed again and did not answer. After a while, he said, "So when you embark on the path of cultivating immortals, you must be cautious, strive to live, and smoothly continue the family bloodline, not let it break in our hands." Upon hearing this, the young man nodded solemnly. Then he thought of the people who had passed away early in these years, and familiar figures flashed through his mind. A strong hatred involuntarily emerged in his heart, and his fists clenched tighter and tighter. He secretly swore that he must find the culprit and let him repay the debt with blood. What the young man thinks in his heart, the middle-aged man is not aware of it, otherwise he would definitely scold the young man not to have such thoughts. He just hopes that the young man can live on, know him. Perhaps the middle-aged man hadn't said so much for a long time, and after finishing speaking, he felt a bit tired. He gently waved his hand to the young man and then lay down with his clothes again. The young man gently tucked in his father's feet, then slammed the door and walked out. As the wooden door closed, the middle-aged man opened his eyes and looked out the dark window, feeling a hint of self-blame and hesitation. He murmured in a low voice, "Is this right? Is it better for Sierra to be an ordinary mortal?" No one can answer him this question. It's drizzling outside, and the villagers haven't woken up yet. They only occasionally hear a few frog calls, making everything seem quiet. This young man named Chen stood at the door, his eyes gazing at the distant green mountains. Growing up in the countryside since childhood has made him more mentally mature than his peers, so he can also guess a little about his father's hesitation. Perhaps in my father's opinion, even if he has spiritual roots and does not cultivate immortality, although it is inevitable for him to die young, he can at least live an ordinary life for decades. Once you embark on the path of cultivating immortality, misfortune and fortune are unpredictable. Maybe he will die an untimely death the next day. He also knew that his father's health was no longer good. It's not just an ordinary person's illness, but a bloodline exhaustion. The uncles in his memory all had this symptom before they died. Even if I had searched for the best immortal master in town before, who was the one who tested my spiritual roots at that time, I was powerless. In fact, the young family had already tried various medicinal pills before, but none of them could make up for the loss of blood and energy. Except for the ancestors who had mastered immortal skills in previous generations, who could rely on their own cultivation to slightly extend their lifespan, all other members of the clan could not escape misfortune. Thinking of this, Chen unconsciously let out a deep sigh. Then he started cooking over the fire today and, for the first time, killed a chicken. Now there are only 3 chickens left at home. The ancient said that people always feel sentimental during the spring rain season, but one should believe that there will always be a sunny day. Chapter 2. Leaving Falling Dust. You are listening at novelfull.audio. One morning a few months later, on a green mountain in Luochen village, this was the place where the villagers were buried after their deaths. The young man named Chen is now kneeling quietly in front of a tomb, and inside lies his father, who passed away due to exhaustion of blood, at the age of only 30. "Father, don't worry, I will work hard to survive and find the culprit who harmed our family. Break it up into countless pieces. Chen Xining looked at the grave in front of her, her eyes already filled with blood, and she clenched her fists tightly with both hands, not even noticing her nails penetrating deep into her flesh. After a while, he calmed down a bit and kowtowed 3 times towards the tomb. As he lifted his head, he could vaguely see a trace of blood on his forehead. After knocking his head, Chen Shi stood up and prepared to leave. However, after only a few steps, his figure stopped and he turned his head to take a deep look at his father's tombstone, as if he wanted to keep his father's figure in his heart forever. Finally, as a mouthful of turbid air exhaled, his resolute gaze returned and he began walking towards the foot of the mountain. After leaving the Green Mountains where his father was buried, Chen Shi quickly returned to his own home. He simply packed a few clothes and brought a short knife that he had bought from a blacksmith at the village entrance a few days ago. He then rushed directly to the Iron Pillar's house in the east of the village. Chen Shi walked for about half a burning incense, and a larger blue stone-tiled house appeared not far ahead. The difference is that there is a carriage parked in front of this house, and the Iron Pillar family relies on this horse to transport goods and make a living. At this moment, the curtain of the carriage opened, revealing a slightly chubby black face. This person was the Iron Pillar that Chen Shi had played with since childhood. He saw Chen Shi at a glance and shouted loudly, "Iron Bull, come over quickly, we've been waiting for you for a long time." Iron Bull is Chen Shi's name in the village, probably because the elderly in the village believe that the word iron represents hard fate, which will reduce the probability of young children dying in the village. So, many children in the village have nicknames like Iron Egg and Iron Baby, but few people actually know the official name, Chen Shi. But Chen Shi's father has always called him by his official name since childhood. Perhaps Chen's father hopes that this name can always remind Chen Shi not to forget his family identity, or perhaps this name represents that the Chen family will place all their hopes on this son. Chen Shi saw the Iron Pillar and immediately ran to the outside of the carriage. He grabbed the sturdy hand of the Iron Pillar and jumped into the carriage. The carriage is very rudimentary, only made of a few wooden boards, wrapped in rainproof leather outside, and filled with goods to be sent to the town inside, leaving only a space the size of one person. The goods on the car emitted various faint odors, permeating the entire carriage. Chen Shi didn't mind this at all, and even secretly felt delighted because this carriage was the only tool from Luochen village to Huda town. In the trajectory of the vast majority of ordinary people's lives, they may only be limited to surrounding villages and have not been to further places, so there are no more means of transportation, let alone in this remote mountain village. Iron Pillar supported Chen Shi, who jumped onto the carriage and patted the bottom of the carriage to show him to sit down. He smiled and said, "Iron Bull, this time you are going to Huda town to study as an apprentice. You must be admitted to the scholar exam and come back. Then I will ask my mother to go find Aunt Wang next door to propose marriage to you. I heard that her child, Xiao Chui, is very handsome." "That's not it, I will definitely marry the most handsome girl in our village when I come back, and then build a big house, Chen Shi laughed and said. He did not tell Tai Zhu the true purpose of going to Huda town, just using an excuse that his father had found him a teacher before, and now he wants to go to study and take the imperial examination. The villagers in Luochen village are all very simple and do not doubt his presence, and they are very supportive of him going out to study. Hee, I think you're good too. There are so many children in the village, only you can read, and your appearance is gentle and refined. It doesn't seem like you're a skilled farmer. Do you remember that in the past, your family's farm work relied on me for help, otherwise it would have relied on your father and son?" Tai Zhu's words suddenly paused. He seemed to know he had said the wrong thing, carefully glanced at Chen Shi, and comforted him softly, "Iron Bull, don't be sad. Although Uncle Chen has gone, if you have anything to do, you can always come to me for help. Just treat it as your own home." Chen Shi knew that Tai Zhu wanted to comfort himself, and his heart was also very moved. He smiled gently and said, "Thank you, Tai Zhu. If it weren't for Aunt and her help, my family's funeral would have been." Thanks to you now, otherwise I wouldn't even know when I would be able to go to Huda town. A few days ago, Chen Shigang and Tai Zhu said they were going to study in Huda town, but he secretly informed his parents about it. The couple were also enthusiastic and took on the important task of sending someone off. So there was this opportunity to take advantage of the delivery of goods and drop off Chen Shi to Huda town. Later, Chen Shi and the others chatted about some interesting stories in the village, until a middle-aged woman urged him several times before Tai Zhu reluctantly got off the carriage. However, before leaving, Tai Zhu handed Chen Shi a lotus leaf package with several pieces of osmanthus cake neatly placed inside. This should be a dim sum made by Tai Zhu's mother. Tai Zhu left it behind. Chen hoped for these sweet-scented osmanthus cakes, and he could not help but feel a complex emotion, both moved and hurt about leaving home. The driver was a dull middle-aged man with slightly grayish hair, who was the father of Iron Pillar. He didn't say anything except for instructing him to sit down and stabilize when he first drove. As the carriage continued to move forward, the village behind it became increasingly blurred until it disappeared. This is Chen Shi's second time leaving Luochen village, and the first time he went to Huda town to test his spiritual roots. Sitting in the car, Chen Shi kept recalling the days of living in Luochen village. He used to fish in the water when he was a child, read and practiced calligraphy when he grew up, and then was sent by his father to Huda town to hire a white-haired immortal to test his spiritual roots. He couldn't help but smile at the corner of his mouth, and soon fell asleep in the bumpy carriage. Chen Shi seemed to have had a long dream. He dreamed that he truly became a fairy, flew back to Luochen village with his sword, waved his hand to the sky and the earth, moved mountains and seas, and was omnipotent. When Chen Shi woke up, the carriage had already arrived at the entrance of Huda town. After thanking Iron Pillar's father, he got off the carriage directly. The wooden man instructed Chen Shi to take care and then drove the carriage in another direction. Chapter 3. Temples outside the city. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, Chen Shi is standing in front of a memorial archway about 2 zhang high, on which 3 big black characters, Huda town, are carved, revealing the ancient vicissitudes of life between the lines. This is the north gate of Huda town. It is said that at the beginning of the opening of Yuezhou, tigers were a threat. At that time, the government issued a huge reward to organize the people to vigorously hunt and kill tigers. In the end, a certain town occupied the top spot with an absolute numerical advantage. In recognition of its contribution, the government named this town Huda town. Chen Shi recalled his thoughts, walked through the memorial archway and stepped on the road paved with bluestone slabs. Both sides of the street are high-rise buildings with several floors. There are carriages coming and going from time to time. There are also various vendors selling dim sum around. The market atmosphere is quite strong. Although Chen Shi is very interested in these things, he dare not take a closer look. After all, he did not come to Huda town for food, drink, and play. His only purpose in coming to Huda town is to find a property belonging to the Yueshi sect and hand over the token to the responsible external disciples inside, requesting them to lead him to the Yueshi sect and then learn from his master. Not to mention that he doesn't know the location of the Yueshi sect now. Even if he does, with his current abilities, he has to rely on others to even come to Huda town. It is simply wishful thinking to rely on himself to reach the Yueshi sect. Only with the help of others can they enter the Yueshi sect. To the west of Huda town, there happened to be a Wandanfang, which was the industry of this sect. These news were all told to him by his father before his death, and he wanted to remember them in his heart. At this moment, it was already afternoon. It was estimated that it would take half a day from the city gate to the west, and it was too late. Chen Shi thought to himself, so he planned to stay overnight first and then rush on tomorrow morning. He touched his pocket and found only a few tens of yuan left, which was enough to cover a day's food expenses, let alone accommodation. As for the remaining money at home, it had already been spent on his father's daily expenses. So Chen Shi asked the street vendor about the location of the Tudi temple, which happened to be several miles outside the city. After thinking about it, he turned his head and walked towards the outside of the city, intending to stay overnight at the Free Temple and go to the west of the city early tomorrow morning. In the evening, Chen Shi had arrived at the door of the land temple that the vendor had mentioned. He saw that the temple was in ruins, the walls had already peeled off, the roof had several large holes several feet wide, and the tribute table was covered in dust. The only advantage is that the dilapidated temple is far from Huda town and extremely dilapidated, so no one can be seen around, which allows him not to worry about encountering some danger. Fortunately, Chen Shi grew up in the village from a young age and didn't mind any hardships. He dragged out some hay from the nearby haystacks and spread it in a corner of the temple, then sat down. From Luochen village to Tudi temple, Chen Shi was already empty. He took out a lotus leaf package from his backpack, which was the osmanthus cake sent by Tai Zhu before leaving. Looking at the tempting aroma of osmanthus cake, Chen Shi, who was already hungry, quickly grabbed a piece and threw it into his mouth. He wolfed it down and in no time, he cleaned up a bag of osmanthus cake. Chen Shi touched his stomach and felt satisfied, so he lay down on the thatched pile. Through the hole in the temple, he could clearly see the stars in the sky. He fantasized about entering the good day of cultivating immortality in the Yueshi sect and fell asleep happily. In the middle of the night, the originally quiet second half of the night, there was a sudden sound of metal collision not far from the temple, which startled Chen Shi, who had already fallen asleep. It's obvious that someone is fighting. Chen Shi rubbed his sleepy eyes with a hesitant expression, thinking whether to go out and see the situation. On the one hand, outside this sparsely populated city, if one participates in such activities recklessly, it is a disaster rather than a blessing, but the location of the fight is so close to the temple, once the fight ends, it may also affect the fish in the pond, and I can't even escape if I want to. After a moment, Chen Shi's face turned fierce and he decided to go and see the situation. If there was any danger, he would immediately run away. Chen Shi took out the short knife he had brought from home from his backpack, hung it on his belt behind him, and quietly followed the sound. Not far from the temple, there is a pile of rubble, and at this moment, Chen Shi is lying behind it, staring intently at the sky above. That's exactly where the two sides in the fight just now were. One is a young Taoist holding a brush in his hand and wearing a grey Taoist robe, the other was a middle-aged man wearing a black long shirt and a green wooden crown behind his hands. The two were facing each other several tens of feet apart. The middle-aged man wearing a wooden crown laughed heartily and said, "Chunyangzi, the unity of heaven and man in your Baiyun temple is nothing more than that. It's better to give up and fight again the next day." However, upon closer inspection, one could notice that the great Han's breath was not smooth. Obviously, the young Taoist also noticed this and just smiled slightly, saying, "Master Liankong, you can still force yourself to smile here even after eating my brush dust. I admire you extremely. If it weren't my close relative who was killed by you a few days ago, I wouldn't want to fight against you, you crazy person. As for now, you still have to surrender and let me take you back to the observation center to release you." It seems that the young Taoist pointed out the secret, and the middle-aged man wearing a wooden crown couldn't help but look angry. Seeing this, the young Taoist became more certain of his judgment and couldn't help but feel proud in his heart. Only Chen Shi, standing behind him, could clearly see that the middle-aged man in Mu Guan's back was flashing green light as he spoke. As the green light gathered larger and larger, the middle-aged man in the wooden crown suddenly became troubled. He waved his palm towards the young Taoist, and in an instant, a green light appeared, wrapped in a black arrow cluster engraved with runes, and headed straight towards the young man's forehead. Obviously, the young Taoist did not anticipate this situation and couldn't help but feel a bit panicked. He quickly wiped his hands vigorously in front of him, and after a wave of spiritual power in front of him, a transparent water curtain formed instantly, completely covering his body. The arrow cluster made a sharp collision sound when it hit the water curtain, although it could not penetrate, it forced it to retreat continuously. Just as the young Taoist was resisting the arrow cluster, the middle-aged man with a wooden crown on the opposite side flipped his palm and a light black light flashed. In his hand, a black umbrella with several skull patterns appeared, emitting a faint evil aura. Then, holding the open handle of the black umbrella with both hands, the umbrella continuously rotated, and the spiritual power in the hands continued to input. Suddenly, a 2-foot-long black short blade flew out from the edge of the umbrella, crazily piercing towards the young man from different directions. The young Taoist's face changed greatly, and he quickly withdrew his hands. At the same time, he threw his Taoist robe into the air, and the robe's spiritual light shone brightly, instantly transforming into a grey light shield. The arrow cluster instantly pierced through the water curtain without spiritual power, colliding with the grey light shield and emitting a piercing sound like a metal collision. Then, the black blade came one after another, and several types of light shone on the light shield, which was really exciting. This Taoist robe has stronger protection than a water curtain, but it has a fatal flaw, which is that it cannot be as lightweight and movable as a water curtain. The young Taoist was inside the protective shield, feeling a little at ease. Just as he was about to take out his magical weapon to attack, he saw the middle-aged man with a wooden crown take advantage of this gap and had already put away his black umbrella to fly to the position several meters in front of the light shield. Suddenly, his whole body was covered in black light, as if he was wearing a black coat, and he punched and rushed towards him. The grey light shield was like thin paper in front of the black fist, with only a loud bang, like the sound of glass shattering, as the fist broke through the protective shield. As the punch was about to strike, the young Taoist gritted his teeth and quickly poured all his spiritual power into his hand to brush the dust. The dust flickered with white light and his hair stood upright like a sword, straight towards the middle-aged fist of Mu Guan. But he didn't want his fists to be stronger than his swords. The dust was shattered inch by inch, and his black fists flashed through the young Taoist's chest. The young Taoist looked at his fist on his chest with an incredulous expression, and then fell from the sky with no breath. Under normal circumstances, two people with the same realm on both sides should not be killed so easily. Unfortunately, Qingcang forgot that Master Liankong is a dual practitioner of body and technique, and his true strength is slightly higher than his. If it weren't for the worry that Qingcang would be running away and chasing after him would take a lot of time, Master Liankong wouldn't even bother pretending to be injured. Chapter 4. Your Choices. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Liankong Master slowly descended from the air and gave a faint glance at the corpse on the ground. Then, his eyes lit up and he lightly hooked his hand in the direction of the corpse. A bag emitting a faint spiritual power appeared in his hand. After casually examining, he nodded in satisfaction and then flicked a single finger onto the body. A walnut-sized fireball rushed straight towards the body, instantly burning to ashes. At this moment, Chen Shi, who was hiding on the side, was already scared and sweating profusely. He dared not move and even seemed to have stopped breathing. He knew in his heart that if Mu Guan's middle-aged man discovered his existence, his fate would inevitably be similar to that corpse. It's like the Immortal Master who tested his spiritual roots for him in the past, always looking at them like ants in the eyes of ordinary people. So stepping on a mole ant directly is obviously not a big deal. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. How could a mortal escape the divine consciousness of a cultivator? After retracting the black arrow cluster, Master Liankong looked faintly at Chen Shi's position and said, "Child, after seeing it for so long, you should have seen enough. Let's take you on your way now." Actually, since Chen Shi arrived near the battlefield, Master Liankong had already known that he was just an ordinary mortal, so he didn't pay any attention. Now that Qingcang is dead, he naturally wants to kill people and silence them. Although Chen Shi may not necessarily leak the information, it does not prevent him from spending an extra breath of time directly killing him. Chen Shi, seeing that he couldn't hide it anymore, was greatly shocked in his heart. He quickly stood up and shouted loudly, "Senior, the young man passed by this place by chance and would never speak recklessly everywhere. I earnestly request the immortal. Master Liankong clearly had no patience with the mortal in front of him. Before Chen Shi finished speaking, a fireball the size of an egg had already gathered above his finger. The blazing flames made a sizzling sound, and even a slight spark splashed on a mortal's body would probably be burned into coke. As Chen Shi spoke, he kept observing the surrounding environment from the corner of his eye, hoping to find an opportunity to escape. However, seeing that Master Liankong had already started casting spells, he felt a wave of despair in his heart. He decided to directly pull out his short sword from behind and quickly stab Master Liankong. Although he knows there is no hope in this move, he will always give his all to those on the brink of life and death. This is due to human nature. It's also due to Chen Shi's rebellious personality. Master Liankong looked expressionlessly at the rushing figure in front of him. As the fireball in his hand was about to bounce past, he suddenly couldn't help but let out a low voice, "Eh." Then he pinched his finger and extinguished the fireball. Then he lightly swung his sleeve, and a strong wind appeared out of nowhere in the void, blowing towards the young man rushing towards him. Chen Shi stumbled and was blown to the ground. "Are you lacking wood in the 5 elements or the 4 spirit roots?" asked the person from Liankong, staring at Chen Shi on the ground. Chen Shi lay on the ground with a pale face, still holding the short knife tightly in his hand. He was puzzled why Master Liankong asked, but still nodded lightly and said, "I don't know what kind of spiritual root I am. When I went to test the spiritual root with the white crane old man, he just said lightly, 'There is a spiritual root.'" He saw that Master Liankong had not killed anyone again, so he immediately begged for mercy and said, "I came from the village to visit my family in the city today. I passed by a temple and stayed overnight. The boy I saw tonight will definitely not talk nonsense everywhere. Please rest assured, Master Xiantu. Please spare your life. Have you ever apprenticed or belonged to a sect?" Venerable Liankong ignored Chen Shi's words and continued to ask himself. "I haven't paid my respects to my master yet, let alone talk about the ownership of my sect," Chen Shi replied honestly. Upon hearing these words, Master Liankong stopped speaking and just stood there quietly with a pensive expression on his face. After a while, he glanced at Chen Shi again, then looked up at the night sky and said, "I can spare you from dying, but you must worship me as your teacher." Although Chen Shi didn't want to apprentice to this person in his heart, he felt that the middle-aged man with a wooden crown in front of him was cunning. If he followed him, he might die tragically at his hands in the future. But compared to life, personal likes and dislikes are not worth mentioning, let alone what will happen in the future. The most important thing now is to live. Chen Shi didn't hesitate at all, so he knelt down and shouted loudly, "Young Chen Shi is willing to apprentice to the senior and learn immortal methods from him." Upon seeing Chen Shi's wit, Master Liankong couldn't help but clap his hands and burst into laughter, saying, "All right, today I will accept you as my disciple. From today on, you will be the first disciple of Master Liankong to close the door." With a gentle lift of his palm, a tremendous force suddenly appeared, and Chen Shi's kneeling legs were lifted up, and he was suspended and came to Liankong Shanren. At this moment, Chen Shi realized that although Master Liankong was dressed in a long robe and looked elegant, he actually had a rather rough appearance. Not only was his body sturdy, but there were also several scars at the corners of his mouth. The most unforgettable thing was the pair of eyes, with a strong sense of darkness deep in their pupils, which was frightening to look at. Venerable Liankong saw Chen Shi staring at him and thought he was scared by his killing of a young Taoist. He said calmly, "The world of cultivation is so cruel. While you gain a longer life and stronger power, you will also bear greater danger. The weaker will surely be devoured by the stronger. You will understand in the future." Later, he seemed to want to correct his image in the heart of his newly recruited disciple, and with a sarcastic expression on his face, he said, "Do you think Chen Yangzi chased me because I killed his close relative? Humph. If ordinary people kill, they will also kill. As a cultivator, will you go to great lengths with others? Not to mention these morally upright and stinky Taoist priests. He is just greedy for my martial arts skills, trying to use it as an excuse to seek revenge for his family and friends, but in fact, he is just killing and robbing treasures. Upon hearing these words, Chen Shi unconsciously glanced at the black spot on the ground not far away, and his expression became very ugly. Although Chen Shi considers himself a member of the so-called Cultivation family, in his own generation, he has long been in the twilight of the Western Mountains, leaving only this single seedling. Even his father is just an ordinary person, and the information about the cultivation world that can be obtained through his father is passed down from generation to generation, something that even his father himself cannot verify. The world of cultivating immortals he imagined in his mind was pure fighting and killing, but reality was even more cruel than that. At this moment, Chen Shi couldn't help but think that if he went to Wandenfang with a token in his hand, would he really achieve his wish, or would he be doomed? If someone really wants to steal their token and then silence them, it's as easy as a palm of hand. Just a small fireball is needed to make themselves disappear forever. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sweat profusely and feel extremely scared. Master Liankong didn't feel strange when he saw Chen Shiling standing still. He recalled the same situation when he first saw a murder. Later, he ignored Chen Shi, who was still in a daze, and summoned a black long silk measuring about 1 zhang in length and width from his storage bag, hugging Chen Shi on the ground. As a black light flashed by, Master Liankong and Chen Shi were already tens of zhang away. Chapter 5. Refining Spirit Pill. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, Chen Shi is sitting in the middle of the black long silk. And Master Liankong stood not far away, frowning deeply, staring at a black arrow cluster engraved with runes in his hand, unsure of what he was thinking. Chen Shi saw that Master Liankong had not paid attention to him, so he lay down on the long silk and looked down. When I entered the city before, I saw buildings, but now when I look down from above, they are only about 30.40 times the size. The street vendors and carriages are even more inconspicuous. With the whistling wind in my ears, green mountains howl past me. He thought to himself that if she had the speed of Changling at that time, she would have reached Wandenfang in just one meal. After about a stick of incense, Liankong Shangren and Chen Shi landed at the foot of a bare mountain. Master Liankong took out a dark green token from his pocket and aimed it at a pinching technique. Suddenly, a dark green beam of light shot out of the token and hit the surface of the mountain, stopping at a distance of about a few inches. He then saw the space in front of the mountain ripple like water ripples. As the ripples gradually disappeared, in no time, a grey stone door about 3 or 4 zhang wide appeared on the surface of the mountain, looking unusually heavy. Chen Shi knew that this was the cave of Master Liankong. Master Liankong nodded secretly when he saw that Chen Shi did not show a surprised expression, and then pushed open the stone door and walked in with a swagger. Chen Shi quickly followed suit upon seeing the situation. Just as I passed through the door, the inside suddenly opened up, and my gaze reached a size of half an acre. The entrance is the hall. There are several tables and chairs in the hall, and the surrounding walls are covered with luminous stones. Above, there is a huge night pearl hanging, even in the mountains, it is as bright as day. There are a total of 7 closed stone chambers in the hall, 3 on each side, and 1 in front of the central hall. As Master Liankong walked to the front seat of the hall and sat down, Chen Shi obediently stood in front of him, as if waiting for orders at any time. Master Liankong is very satisfied with Chen Shi's approach. After all, no one likes people who come to their own territory and still dominate, taking care of themselves. Chen Shi, although you have spiritual roots, you are almost the worst among all spiritual roots. Even if you can cultivate immortality, you will only build a foundation throughout your life, said Master Liankong calmly. Chen Shinu didn't speak after nuzzling his mouth, just nodded because he had no understanding of the current cultivation system and could only listen to what Master Liankong said. I think you must have seen me kill Qingyangzi with my bare hands, that's right. I'm on the path of refining my body. If you practice with peace of mind under my seat, although you can't guarantee how far you can go, you can definitely stand invincible among mortals and ensure your lifelong wealth and prosperity without any problem. Did you hear that clearly? Master, you heard me clearly, Chen Shi obediently replied, his expression showing a longing for the future. In fact, he felt quite distressed in his heart. He wanted to live for a long time, not to refine his body, but at this moment he dared not speak recklessly. But also, there are a series of tasks entrusted to you. If you complete them well, I will not hesitate to give you a heavy reward. In addition, these are the secret techniques I have cultivated and the control token of the cave. The person in charge of refining the air nodded satisfactorily and threw a white jade slip and a light yellow token over. Chen Shi took the jade slip and saw that it was only the size of a palm. The whole body was crystal clear, slightly glowing, and felt slightly cold to the touch. The light yellow token was similar to the Yueshi sect token on his chest, but obviously not the one used by Master Liankong. It is estimated that there is a significant difference in the degree of control in the cave. You haven't opened your spirit yet, you don't have spiritual power, and you can't use these two things. You can take a look around the cave by yourself. I'll go out and get you a spirit refining pill. After you open your spirit and have magical power, you can use it normally. Before Chen Shi could react, Master Liankong's figure flashed and he left the cave directly. Accompanied by the heavy closing sound of the entrance to the cave, Chen Shi carried the token and jade slip into his arms and then began wandering around the cave. Chen Shi first pushed open a stone door on the left side, and what caught his eye was a huge medicine furnace with a diameter of about 10 zhang in the center. There were also several bottles and jars scattered around, but almost all were covered with a thin layer of gray, indicating that this alchemy room had not been used much. Turning his head and pushing open the second stone gate, a huge medicinal garden appeared inside, filled with a forest of plants and trees, but Chen Shi didn't know any of them. Chen Shi felt that this should be the most pure place of spiritual energy in the entire cave, and couldn't help but greedily take a deep breath. Suddenly, a refreshing aroma flowed down his nostrils, and his whole body seemed to be much lighter. But he didn't dare to touch the spiritual medicine planted inside casually. This kind of thing that allowed him to come in at will might have some forbidden mechanism, and he might accidentally suffer a big loss. Chen Shi then pushed open the third stone door, which was scattered with a few unknown metal fragments. It must be the refining room. And there are also 3 stone gates on the right, one of which cannot be pushed open. According to Chen Shi's basic knowledge, the cave usually has all 5 internal organs, and he speculates that this stone chamber should be a place for cultivating spiritual insects. Because he has already looked at the other 2 rooms, one of which has several bookshelves, each with a book on it, obviously a library. The last stone door was empty inside. After Chen Shi came out of the stone chamber, he walked behind the chair where Master Liankong was originally sitting. There was also a stone door several zhang in size, but its structure was completely different from other places. The surface of the huge stone gate shimmered with metallic luster, and upon closer inspection, he felt dizzy and dizzy. He thought this should be the place where Master Liankong usually cultivates. After strolling through the cave, Chen Shi sat down on a chair and saw his hand resting on his chin, staring at the door of the secret room where Master Liankong was practicing, his eyes flickering. At this moment, he was very hesitant in his heart, not sure if he wanted to find an opportunity to escape, but let alone the question of whether he could escape. Where could he go after escaping? Is it really better to go to Yueshi sect than here? Finally, he let out a light sigh and murmured to himself, now we can only take one step and see one step. Let's talk about it when the boat reaches the bridge. Chapter 6. Building a layer of qi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After a meal, with a slight sound from the entrance of the cave, Chen Shi felt a white light flash in front of him. When he opened his eyes again, Master Liankong was already sitting upright on the chair in front of him. Master Liankong glanced casually at the cave, but did not notice any fluctuation in the prohibition. He gave Chen Shi a surprised glance. Chen Shi quickly stood up from the chair upon seeing the situation, deliberately appearing at a loss. He hesitated and said, "Master, did I do something wrong?" He cursed inwardly, saying that Master Liankong was indeed an old fox. If he really acted recklessly, he would definitely be trapped by the ban now, and he would have to give himself a warning. Master Liankong laughed heartily and said meaningfully, "You're doing well. This is the refining spirit pill, let's continue." He flipped his palm and a black light appeared, gently throwing it and accurately landing in Chen Shi's hand. After the black light dissipated, Chen Shi fixed his gaze on a black medicine bottle the size of a palm. He looked up and saw that Master Liankong had no intention of stopping him, so he directly opened the bottle cap. A wisp of misty air immediately appeared above the black small bottle. After taking a deep breath, Chen Shi's body suddenly felt a tingling sensation, which was very comfortable. And this scent is slightly different from the aroma I just smelled in the pharmacy, not only rich but also composed of many more components. Just as Chen Shi was still immersed in savoring the fragrance of medicine, Master Liankong inexplicably brought a round barrel with a diameter of about half a zhang from somewhere, filled with white liquid, from which came waves of the fragrance of unknown herbs. When Master Liankong saw Chen Shi standing there dumbfounded, he pointed to the wooden barrel in front of him and said, "This is the marrow washing liquid I made from more than a dozen precious spiritual medicines. After taking the refining pill, soaking it in it can maximize the effectiveness of the refining pill. Now enter the wooden barrel and start refining." Chen Shi didn't hesitate at all when he heard this. He looked at the wooden bucket in front of him, took a deep breath, then took off his shirt and jumped in directly. The water level in the barrel was not deep, just enough to submerge his neck, so he sat in the center of the barrel. The water in the barrel was scorching hot upon contact, but there was no burning sensation. On the contrary, not only did he not feel any warmth in his body, but strands of coolness flooded into his heart, making him feel refreshed and refreshed. Chen Shi knew he couldn't delay at this moment, so he quickly took the black medicine bottle placed next to the wooden barrel and gently poured it over, rolling out a white pill the size of a longan. Without careful observation, he opened his mouth and swallowed it directly. At first, Chen Shi only felt a sharp pain in his abdomen, and then the pain quickly spread to every corner of his body, as if a force was colliding with him. The intense pain caused the veins on his forehead to burst, and beads of sweat as big as beans kept flowing down. But his resilient personality, which he had developed since childhood, made him unwilling to shout out loud. When he turned his head to look at Master Liankong, he saw him sitting silently without any expression, and then he understood that he needed to carry this matter on his own. Chen Shi couldn't help but feel fierce in his heart. If he couldn't even bear this pain, how could he embark on the path of cultivating immortality? So he gritted his teeth tightly and, under the intense pain, held on to the last trace of clarity. With the continuous collision of this energy, Chen Shi's body kept making a slight thud sound, which was the opening of some blockages in his body in an instant. At the same time, his flesh and blood were nourished and refined at this moment, accompanied by a large amount of black impurities flowing out through his pores, and a strong foul smell immediately filled the entire cave. After about a cup of tea, the energy gradually weakened and eventually disappeared, and the pain disappeared completely. At this moment, the liquid in the barrel continuously poured into the already dilated pores, washing every part of the body over and over again. A relaxed and joyful pleasure replaced the pain just now. After half a burning incense stick, Chen Shi no longer felt anything unusual. He knew that the barrel of medicine had been absorbed completely, so he stood up and jumped out of the wooden barrel. When he looked back between his clothes, the originally white liquid inside the barrel had now turned pitch black like ink. He thought to himself that it must be all impurities he had secreted. After Chen Shi finished packing up, he immediately bent down to bow down to Master Liankong and loudly said with a passionate expression, "Thank you for your kindness in creating again, Master." Regardless of the purpose for which Venerable Liankong adopted himself as a disciple, or whether he recognized this master or not, he now relies entirely on him for spiritual enlightenment. Therefore, this worship by Chen Shi is voluntary and sincere. Master Liankong just nodded lightly and said, "Now feel it with your heart and see what changes there are." In fact, he was also surprised by Chen Shigong's performance when he just opened his spirit. After all, he had a deep understanding of the pain of opening his spirit, so he was ready to take action at any time. He only waited for Chen Shi to speak and plead, but did not expect the young man to finally resist without saying a word. Upon hearing this, Chen Shi immediately understood and immediately sat down in meditation, feeling it carefully with his heart. Unexpectedly, he realized that his body had undergone significant changes. Not only were his skin pores slightly larger than before, but he occasionally felt restless, as if he was breathing. Moreover, the originally empty body now has a faint and misty aura, which can be exhaled through one's own circulation. At the same time, the same breath can also be felt outside the body, and can be absorbed in a small amount into one's own body. At this moment, he had already realized that the aura inside him was the spiritual power only possessed by cultivators, and the aura outside was the spiritual energy of this bald mountain. At the same time, he also found that his bones were a small circle thicker than before, and the hardness and strength had also improved, with some transparent colors scattered faintly, rather than being obscured by the dirt inside. This was a feeling he had never experienced before. He knew that he had successfully enlightened, which also meant that he was officially stepping into the cultivation world from then on. Chen Shi was already excited when he thought of this. His cheeks turned red in an instant, and he couldn't help but smile at the corners of his mouth. His eyes showed a hint of warmth. Then, he took a deep breath, calmed his excitement a bit, stood up again, bowed forward, and truthfully reported his feelings to Master Liankong. Master Liankong tapped his finger lightly on the table, pondered for a while, and then nodded, saying, "You have reached a level of qi cultivation. During this time, you should first experience it carefully. If you have any questions, you can go to the library to read the classics. And before, I gave you the jade slips and tokens, you only need to inject divine consciousness and magic to read and use them separately." Without looking back, he walked into his cultivation secret room. As the door of the secret room closed, Chen Shi touched his chin, showing a thoughtful expression, and then consciously walked into the unmanned stone room. Chapter 7. Spiritual Roots and Body Refining. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as Chen Shigong entered the stone chamber, he could no longer suppress his joy and happily jumped up and down in place. Then he turned around on his own and even performed martial arts on the ground. After a while of tossing and turning, he found that his blood flow was much faster than before, and he didn't feel tired at all, as if he couldn't use all his strength. If outsiders see it, Chen Shi is not only 1 point taller than before, but also has clearer facial features. Combined with his dark skin and his pair of sword eyebrows, his face gives a sense of simplicity and perseverance. Chen Shi chuckled and walked out of the stone gate with a faint sense of joy, arriving at the library. Looking at several rows of bookshelves filled with books, he believed that the first thing he needed to find was the basic knowledge of cultivating immortals at present. After all, he claimed to be a descendant of the cultivation family, but in reality, besides giving himself a token, he had no gain. If it weren't for encountering Master Liankong, it would have been a question whether he could activate his spirit. Even if he really joined the Yueshi sect, his resources would not be arbitrarily tilted towards him, and he may not be better than he is now. After flipping through the books for a while, Chen Shi's eyes suddenly lit up and he picked up a slightly shabby book not far away, which was prominently inscribed with the words, Yuezhou Tuji. He chuckled and began to read, shaking his head, somewhat reminiscent of a village scholar studying. This book, with his excellent learning ability from childhood to adulthood, can still be understood by 7 or 8 points. In this way, Chen Shi stayed in the library for several days, and the venerable Liankong ignored him except for sending a few pigu pills. Similarly, Chen Shi was also content with leisure and made the most of his time to supplement various cultivation knowledge. After browsing through the books in the library, Chen Shi returned to his own stone room and sat on top of the dough. He let out a light sigh, constantly recalling the content of the books he had read. He found that he was originally located in Huda Town, a remote town on the border of Yan State, without even a slightly larger sect. However, his affiliated Yuezhou had 4 major sects, namely Yueshi sect, Baiyun Temple, Wanlian Mountain, and Bailing sect. Basically, all important cultivation resources were controlled by these 4 sects, making it too difficult for a casual cultivator to obtain resources. Moreover, in the realm of cultivating immortals, cultivators are divided into 4 realms based on their realm. Qi cultivation, foundation building, alchemy formation, and elemental baby cultivation. Chen Shi speculates that there are other realms behind it, but they are not mentioned in the book, so he is unaware of them. Except for the Qi cultivation period, which is completed by completing 10 levels, all other realms are divided into 4 small stages. Early stage, middle stage, late stage, and complete stage. If a cultivator breaks through a great realm, their lifespan can increase exponentially. Taking the 100-year-old age of mortals as an example, a cultivator at the level of Yuanying can have at least 1,000 years of lifespan. When they see this, even Chen Shi's nature cannot help but be surprised and envious. How unfair it is to think that one's own family died prematurely under 40 years old. Similarly, mana and divine consciousness will also skyrocket with the improvement of the realm, so a cultivator may be able to surpass the perfect stage in the initial stage of the realm, but it is rare to cross the great realm of martial arts because the difference between the two can be described as a gap, and as they reach the upper realm, even for every small improvement, their strength will be vastly different. The stronger the magical power of a cultivator, the greater the magical power they can cast, while those with strong divine awareness can cast more spells or use more tools at the same time. Moreover, divine awareness can help cultivators observe the surrounding environment more closely, so it was only then that the cultivator could easily discover their hidden self. At present, the level of cultivating one's own qi can be said to only belong to the realm of hearing and seeing, and its only function is to check the jade slips, but it still cannot reach the level of releasing divine consciousness. Spirit root is the only and most important requirement for entering the cultivation world. Without spiritual roots, one cannot absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and it is impossible to cultivate immortality. Similarly, spiritual roots are also divided into several types, among which single spiritual roots and 5-element spiritual roots are the best. Because the single spiritual root absorbs and transforms the spiritual energy of heaven and earth the fastest, the cultivation speed is also the fastest among all spiritual roots. On the contrary, the absorption and transformation of the 5-element spiritual roots are the slowest, so the cultivation speed is also the slowest. However, due to the completeness of its 5 elements, the accumulated magic power of the 5-element spiritual roots in the same realm is the most powerful, often able to crush single spiritual root cultivators in the same realm. The other types of spiritual roots, such as double spiritual roots, 3 spiritual roots, etc., are relatively poor. The second to last is my own type of 4 spiritual roots. Perhaps by practicing hard before building the foundation, I may have the opportunity to catch up with others. However, after the foundation building period, when I need to absorb and transform a large amount of heaven and earth spiritual power, it will be particularly difficult, let alone break through various levels. Of course, what comforts Chen Shi a little is that he is not the worst spiritual root, but the worst is a type called pseudo-spiritual root. This type of spiritual root is difficult to detect when tested, just like a single spiritual root. However, after the 5th level of qi cultivation, he cannot further absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, his cultivators can only stop at the level before the 5th level of qi cultivation. There are various magical tools and talismans in the world of cultivating immortals, which are divided into lower level, middle level, upper level, and ultimate level magical tools, talismans. At the same level, they are further divided into upper, middle, and lower levels. However, cultivators in the period of alchemy or baby cultivation generally use their own crafted talismans or talismans. After clearing his thoughts, Chen Shi took out the jade slip given by Master Liankong from his arms and pressed it tightly against his forehead. After several days of continuous efforts and attempts, he was finally able to release a trace of divine consciousness and enter the jade slips to view their contents. After less than a cup of tea, Chen Shi was so tired that his forehead was sweating and he was gasping for breath. However, fortunately, there were only the first 3 layers of martial arts in the jade slips, and his content was almost remembered. At this moment, he realized that the technique practiced by Master Liankong was called Liang Baisua Gong. This technique mainly focused on refining the body, with qi as a supplement. Practicing until qi was fully developed, it could form a layer of metal-like skin outside the body, which is the copper skin realm that ordinary swords and spears cannot pierce. No wonder Master Liankong was able to forcefully pick up the dust of a young Taoist with his bare hands at that time, but he didn't know what level he had reached in his cultivation. Finally, according to the martial arts records, the system of refining the body is divided into several realms, namely copper skin and iron bones, jade veins and gold blood, and the transformation of the 5 organs and 6 viscera into yin and yang. It is also specifically stated that cultivators with metallic spiritual roots can achieve twice the result with half the effort. Chen Shi secretly speculated that he had a metallic spiritual root. Could this be the reason why Master Liankong took him as his disciple? But upon careful consideration, it was quickly denied. Chapter 8. Chen Shi's Tasks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the following half-month, Chen Shi not only entered the library to read various classics, but also returned to the secret room to meditate and practice qi. Although his realm did not improve, he became more proficient in using magic and divine consciousness. That morning, while Chen Shi was meditating, the voice of Master Liankong suddenly came to his ears, urging him to hurry to the hall and summon him for an appointment. Chen Shi dared not delay and immediately got up from the cattail and walked quickly towards the hall. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw Master Liankong sitting calmly on the chair above. Chen Shi immediately bent down and bowed. I pay my respects to Master. After scanning Chen Shi's eyes casually, Master Liankong said, You have been under my sect for over a month now. Starting from today, you can go to the back mountain to cut down the diamond bamboo, and then take it to the local market in the city to sell. You must submit no less than 20 spirit stones per month. This will be your cultivation task, and you should practice your body cultivation skills as soon as possible. If you submit less than this number of spirit stones per month, I will be punished severely. Chen Shi was delighted in his heart and thought to himself that this master had finally begun to guide him in his cultivation. This was much better than blindly exploring. In the past month, he had not learned anything. So he arched his hand with a solemn expression and said, Master, please rest assured that I will do my best to complete the task. In addition, I have some unclear points about my martial arts, and I would like to ask Master to clarify them. Master Liankong said calmly, If there are any issues with body refining, you can raise them as much as possible. Let's skip the rest. Chen Shi thought he could get the answer he wanted, but he didn't expect this master to only care about his body cultivation skills. After hesitating for a moment, he decided to grit his head and ask, My disciple's cultivation of magic. Humph. Are you treating my words as a breeze in your ear? I asked you to focus on practicing body cultivation techniques, and you also asked questions about Dharma cultivation. Liankong master snorted heavily, then his face turned cold, and his eyes fell on Chen Shi's face like knives. Chen Shi felt as if the hum of Master Liankong had hit his mind with a heavy hammer, leaving him blank and in great pain. He stumbled and fell to the ground. When he regained consciousness, his face was already pale with fear. He quickly got up and said with a regretful expression, I shouldn't have disobeyed the instructions of my master. I should have been punished. Upon hearing these words, Master Liankong's expression softened slightly and he continued to reprimand harshly, If there is another time, you can come from where you are and go where you are. Will they still kill me? How could it be so serious? Chen Shi felt a chill in his heart, but on the surface, he remained completely obedient and nodded repeatedly. After a moment of silence, Master Liankong threw out a palm-sized blue cloth bag in a jade slip, and said coldly, "This is a storage bag. You can put chopped diamond bamboo into it." The jade slip has its usage method and market location. You must learn to use both proficiently. Chen Shi looked at the item he had just received, feeling quite curious in his heart, but he dared not be as reckless as before. Instead, his expression became more respectful and he followed his words. Master Liankong stared at Chen Shi below, seemingly wanting to see his true thoughts. After a while, he said slowly, "Cutting down the diamond bamboo is beneficial for your body cultivation, and my master's body cultivation technique is also practiced in this way." As Master Liankong turned around and was about to leave, just a few steps later, his figure suddenly stopped and he turned his head and said with a gloomy expression, "In a year, if your body refining technique doesn't achieve the effect I want, you don't need to stay here." Then, with a flash of spiritual light, his figure disappeared. Upon hearing this, Chen Shi felt a chill behind his back and couldn't help but shiver. The old fox's final warning made him very anxious and uneasy. According to Chen Shi's own thoughts, the most desired practice is Dharma cultivation, because only when the realm is improved can the lifespan be extended. Otherwise, with his short-lived bloodline, no matter how high the body cultivation technique is, it will not be useful, and in the end, it will not turn into a piece of yellow earth. Fortunately, Chen Shi was cautious and determined, and soon suppressed those anxious emotions and began planning his own cultivation plan. Thinking that there was still 1 year left, he must find a way to meet the requirements of Master Liankong, and of course, also achieve his own goals, he thought to himself. Later, Chen Shi didn't want to waste any time and quickly arrived at the entrance of the cave. He took out a pale yellow token and pointed his finger towards it. A faint white light floated out of it and hit the stone gate. The door opened in response to the sound. This is Chen Shi's first time coming out of the cave, and after he came out, he couldn't help but look around. There was no sound of birds around this bare stone mountain, and all one could see was either hard boulders or thick loess. No one could have imagined that there would be a cave here. Chen Shi didn't stop much and immediately turned around and walked towards the back mountain. However, when he arrived at the foot of the back mountain, he was stunned and realized that there was no way to reach the back mountain. He could only climb through the foot of the mountain. After a while, at the waist of the back mountain, a huge black stone suddenly extended 2 bright red palms behind it, followed by a sweaty head, and finally the whole body was completely exposed. This is exactly Chen Shi, who has gone through countless hardships to climb up. He stood on the boulder and looked around, only to find a large depression on the mountainside of the bald mountain, including a bamboo forest emitting a light yellow golden light. He felt a sense of joy in his heart and secretly thought that this was the diamond bamboo. Then he jumped directly off the giant stone and ran at a faster speed to the side of the bamboo forest. After Chen Shi stood still, he couldn't stop panting and sweating uncontrollably. Beads of sweat as big as beans kept flowing down, and he looked down at his hands carefully. Although they were red, there were no signs of being scratched by the hard stone. He knew that the body had become stronger and more horizontal after opening the spirit. If it had been changed to before, it would have already been covered in bloodstains. After approaching the bamboo forest, Chen Shi couldn't help but shudder. He found that this bamboo was completely different from the ordinary green bamboo. Not only was it golden throughout, but almost every one was 7 or 8 zhang high. The longest one was almost on par with the mountainside of this giant mountain. Then he walked towards a diamond bamboo and lightly tapped its surface with his fingers. To his surprise, a faint metallic sound could be heard, indicating its hardness. Chen Shi looked at the several acres of bamboo forest in front of him, his face bitter, and he couldn't help but curse Master Liankong in his heart. After resting next to the bamboo forest for a while, he began to slowly explore the surroundings. After all, in a new environment, he had to first understand everything around him. Chen Shi held the short knife brought from the village, chopping open the dry branches blocking ahead while slowly moving forward, and trying to remember the route and surrounding environment. It took him an hour to walk around the bamboo forest, and currently only the eastern part has not been carefully examined. Oh! Chen Shi couldn't help but shout as he swung his knife forward, realizing that a 3-foot long and wide pit had appeared directly in front of him, a phenomenon he had never seen before. The soil of this bald mountain is already very hard, and it cannot be washed away by rainwater. Moreover, this place is rarely visited, and it is extremely unlikely that it was excavated by humans. Chen Shi couldn't help but be very curious and quickly walked away. Unexpectedly, Chen Shi arrived half a foot away from the pit, and a strong spiritual energy, mixed with some medicinal fragrance, rushed towards him, causing Chen Shi, who was bathing in it, to lose a lot of his previous fatigue and boost his spirit. He secretly felt a joy in his heart, perhaps he had met a treasure. Quickly focus and look into the pit. Oh! The pit is only about half a zhang deep, but there are several colorful elixirs growing at the bottom. Chen Shi glanced briefly and finally couldn't help but sigh in frustration, because he didn't know anything at all. Although I don't know each other now, I'll figure it out sooner or later. Anyway, this can be considered chance, it's better than nothing. Chen Shi could only comfort himself so much. Of course, the most important thing now is to cover it up well to avoid being discovered, especially by the master of refining the void. Fortunately, this pit is relatively small, and it is extremely difficult to find it without coming to the side. Chen Shichao looked around and didn't notice any other abnormalities. He quickly picked up a bundle of chopped dry branches and covered them on the road. Then he looked at the surface of the pit from different angles, feeling that no one would notice it, and then followed the original path back to the Zhulin intersection. Chapter 9. Difficulty in Breaking Bamboo. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Chen Shi returned to the Zhulin intersection again, it was already dark. He calmly picked up a bundle of dead branches from the roadside, used an ignition stone to raise the fire, and then sat down on the nearby boulder. The firelight illuminated his still slightly tender cheeks very clearly, and his eyebrows furrowed tightly, his lips moved slightly, murmuring to himself all along. What is the reason why Master Liankong accepted him as his disciple? Do I have to keep following his requirements? Also, the spiritual medicine on the east side of the bamboo forest needs to find a way to figure out what kind it is. Thinking of these, the complicated things made Chen Shi's mind quite confused. Coupled with the fatigue of climbing today, he felt drowsy for a moment and could no longer focus on meditating and practicing, so he lay down and fell asleep. Late at night, everything was silent. Suddenly, a black figure drifted over the bamboo forest. In the darkness, the figure wore a wooden crown and a black robe, almost blending into the darkness. He glanced at Chen Shi's position and didn't notice anything unusual before disappearing with a slight sneer. The next day, as the sun had just risen, Chen Shi was already practicing qi meditation. He still maintains the simple and honest temperament of being in the village. No matter how hard and tired he was doing farm work the previous day, he woke up early the next day. The difference is that now he has switched from doing farm work to practicing meditation. After a moment, Chen Shi exhaled a long breath of turbid air, then stood up and stretched out his hands and feet. He found that 70 to 80% of yesterday's fatigue had disappeared through sleep and meditation. He lowered his head again to look at his restored palm, clenched his fist vigorously, as if he had gained a little more strength than yesterday. He nodded secretly. It seemed that the cultivator still needed more practice to improve, and meditation alone was useless. Then he turned his gaze to the nearby diamond bamboo and couldn't help but touch his chin. When Chen Shi saw this bamboo forest yesterday, he was already thinking about how to cut it down. It was obvious that relying on the small knife he brought with him was not enough, and Master Liankong did not give him any magical tools. He thought he could only rely on his physical strength and cut it hard with his bare hands. After speaking, he found a diamond bamboo that was only the thickness of his own arm, tied a horse stance in front of it, concentrated his strength on the fist in front of him, and fiercely smashed it forward. Only a few loud noises were heard, and the leaves of the diamond bamboo were gently shaken, but the surface of the bamboo hit by the fist left no trace. Chen Shi remained silent and continued to swing his fists towards the bamboo until he was exhausted, panting heavily. However, he saw the bamboo still standing in place, with its surface intact as before. But his personality is that he never gives up from a young age, and when faced with strength, he becomes stronger. He is confident that he can definitely chop down the diamond bamboo. After taking a break for a while, Chen Shi changed his fist to a split, and even directly grabbed it, but unfortunately, the result was still the same. However, after more than an hour of effort, Chen Shi was so tired that he lay directly on the ground, with back pain and soreness all over his body, and his hands and feet seemed to be numb. He looked up at the diamond bamboo in front of him, feeling a sense of frustration in his heart. At this moment, his stomach began to growl uncontrollably. This is understandable, after all, with so much physical exertion, the demand for food is bound to be even greater for him who is still growing. Chen Shi then slowly sat up from the ground, took out a white pill the size of a longan from the storage bag at his waist, and swallowed it in one gulp. This is exactly the Pai Gu Dan given by Master Liankong before. Since he received the storage bag, he couldn't wait to start learning how to use it, constantly replaying items in and out. After a period of practice, he finally became proficient in using storage bags. Chen Shi then put in the Pi Gu Dan, the cave token, including previous clothes, short knives, and so on. The only thing left was the Yueshi sect token that had been placed close to his chest. As soon as the Pai Gu Dan entered the abdomen, it instantly turned into a warm current that spread throughout the body, bringing a tingling sensation. Then, a wave of satiety hit, causing Chen Shi to belch uncontrollably. After Chen Shi regained his strength slightly, he looked down at his red and swollen palms, unable to help but ponder. At the same time, he carefully recalled in his mind the movements of the refining master who had broken the dust with his bare hands, and his palm involuntarily imitated and danced. Suddenly, he patted his thigh and exclaimed with great joy, "I understand. It's not that my palms are not hard enough, nor is the chopping action wrong, it's that my strength is insufficient. Although I have used all my strength, I forget that I am already a cultivator. The most important skill is to use the spiritual power inside my body. If I concentrate all my spiritual power on my palms." Chen Shi thought of this and without saying a word, jumped up from the ground and walked back to the previous bamboo. He lowered his head and carefully glanced at his palm, then the trajectory of the Liang Baisua Gong technique came to mind. After a few breaths, a faint white light flickered outside his body, flowing in a regular pattern and slowly converging towards the palm area, finally enveloping the entire edge. At this moment, he was panting heavily, gritting his teeth and continuing to use his energy, feeling the massive spiritual power gathered in his palm. When he found that this spiritual power was a bit out of control, he knew he had reached its limit. It's not too late. Cut it off. With a loud shout, Chen Shi's palm swung straight towards the diamond bamboo with a knife path. I saw a palm wrapped in white awns, with a hint of wind blowing, fiercely chopping on the surface of the diamond bamboo. With a piercing sound of metal collision, Chen Shi's palm had already stopped in mid-air, and the surrounding white light slowly disappeared. From a distance, the bamboo seemed to be the same as before, but Chen Shi couldn't help but burst out laughing. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that although the bamboo had not broken, a palm-thick crack had been cut hard, and the faint golden light emanating from its interior was clearly visible. After retracting his palm, he carefully measured the depth of the dent, which was about half the length of his thumb. After some estimation, he believed that if he was lucky, he would be able to cut off an arm-thick diamond bamboo in about 2 days. But at this point, he was already satisfied because he had found a way to cut down the diamond bamboo. With practice becoming more skillful and the gradual increase of his combined strength, the speed would definitely accelerate significantly. Chapter 10. Approaching the East Again. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. As the days passed by day, in 2 more days, Chen would arrive at the back mountain for a month. During these days, in addition to desperately cutting down the diamond bamboo every day, he also practiced meditation and qi. Through this continuous practice, not only did he deepen his understanding of the Liang Baisua Gong, but he also became more proficient in the combination of strength and magic. A few days ago, he had already reached the 2nd level of the Liang Baisua Gong in terms of body cultivation. Now, his skin emits a brighter metallic luster than before, but in terms of magic, he has yet to break through the 2nd level of qi cultivation. He vaguely felt that there was a strong barrier in front of the spirit sea, blocking the way like a tiger. He had attempted several full-force impacts, but none of them could shake the slightest bit. Instead, it caused his blood and energy to churn uncontrollably, almost fainting. When Chen couldn't break through solely based on his own abilities, he turned his mind to the spiritual medicines on the east side of the bamboo forest. I hope to exchange those spiritual medicines for pills that can improve one's cultivation or increase the chance of breakthrough in the local market, to help oneself, he thought to himself. Coincidentally yesterday, when Master Lienkong sent him the Pigu pill, he also gave him a few extra spirit stones as a transaction fee for entering and exiting the market, and informed him to go out for a few days, warning him not to be lazy. Chen then felt that it was time to implement his plan. He first threw the diamond bamboo in front of him into the storage bag one by one, counted it carefully, and found exactly 20. Then, after packing up other things, he walked towards the east of the bamboo forest. In just 1 cup of tea, he arrived again next to the previously covered pit. Chen looked around and found that everything was very quiet. No abnormalities were found, and there were no other marks on the covered dry branches above the cave entrance. He immediately lifted the dead branch above and opened a hole that only allowed himself to pass through, then jumped directly down and covered the dead branch again from underground. Chen carefully stepped on the soil around the elixir, counting 3 different types of elixirs through the sunlight shining through the withered branches. One type is about 1 foot tall, with square petals and bright blood-like colors, and stems protruding with pointed thorns. There are a total of 10 plants. One is wrapped in several emerald green leaves by a huge receptacle, with only 8 plants. The last one is like a lotus seed, with a yellow and green color throughout the body, and a green fruit protruding from the head. There is only 1 plant of this elixir in total. And it has a bright luster, with slight differences faintly. The quantity of this last type of spiritual medicine exceeded Chen's expectations. When he first came, he did not carefully examine it, and he did not expect that there was only 1 plant of this kind of spiritual medicine similar to lotus seeds. This makes him a bit difficult. Chen does not want to pick all the medicinal herbs before understanding their value, in order to avoid irreparable losses. After careful consideration, he decided to pick half of the other 2 elixirs, except for the last one that was temporarily not used. I saw him take out his short knife and carefully dig open the soil around the root and stem of the spiritual medicine, pulling them out one by one. In order not to affect the lotus-like spiritual medicine, he even chose a place far away from its position to start digging. In less than a while, both spiritual medicines had been picked and carefully placed in the storage bag. Chen then crawled out of the pit and restored the cover of the hole once again. He stood in front of the cave entrance, dusted the soil off his body, turned around and looked back again. Without noticing any problems, he ran towards the cave on the front mountain. Chen's speed of returning this time was significantly faster than when he came, estimated to have only taken half an hour, reducing nearly 20% of the time. Moreover, there were no scars left on his hands during the rock climbing process. Along the way, he was so excited that he picked up a fist-sized stone and clenched it hard. As a result, the stone shattered into several pieces, something he had never imagined before. From this, He personally experienced the terrifying physical strength of the cultivator, thinking that if he were to cultivate to a higher level in the future, it would be easy to tear open this bald mountain with his bare hands. When he arrived at the stone gate of the cave, he skillfully took out a token and entered the cave. Then he walked towards the secret room of Master Liankong and shouted at its door, "I pay my respects to Master." Seeing that there was no response from the secret room for a long time, he knew that Master Liankong had already left. He felt a burst of joy in his heart and then turned his head to walk towards the second stone door on his left. Chen Shi gently pushed open the stone door, and a refreshing fragrance rushed towards him. This stone chamber is the medicine garden of Master Liankong. It is filled with various exotic flowers and plants, colorful and vibrant, creating a scene full of spring. The reason why these spiritual medicines can thrive in such a thin environment of spiritual energy is, he speculates, because the soil in the spiritual field of Master Liankong is rich in spiritual energy, and prohibition can prevent the leakage of spiritual energy, artificially creating an environment suitable for the growth of spiritual medicines. Of course, these spiritual medicines are definitely not valuable varieties, otherwise they would have absorbed the spiritual energy inside long ago. He didn't come into the pharmacy to steal medicine this time. Who knows how many forbidden traps were set up around these nurseries. He came here to follow the plan. Search for the same variety among these spiritual medicines as oneself. If there are any, then he dares to boldly trade in the local market, if not, he has no intention of trading. He would rather not have these elixirs than be killed and robbed. Then Chen Shi stood not far from the nursery, comparing the spiritual medicine he had picked in his hand, and began the same comparison. I saw him occasionally scratching his head, pausing to ponder, and intermittent murmurs coming from his mouth. This looks a bit like. This is not. After a meal, Chen Shi came out of the stone chamber and returned to his secret room. He sat on top of the futon, dragging his chin with one hand, his eyes fixed on the empty front, his mind constantly thinking rapidly. Just now, he had compared all the spiritual medicines in the medicine garden, and except for the one that looked like a lotus seed, he couldn't find the same one. The other two had found the same spiritual medicine in the medicine garden, and the planting quantity was more than dozens of plants. This made him believe that apart from the lotus-shaped elixir, the other two were not important and rare elixirs. So when you take it to the local market for trading tomorrow, you don't have to worry too much about any problems. As for the lotus-like elixir, we can only figure it out later before making any further plans. Thinking of this, Chen Shi began to silently calculate in his heart about going to Fengshe tomorrow, reminding himself of the things to pay attention to, and the most important thing is to go safely and come back safely.